BYU in ESPN's early projection for the top 12 and the college football playoff, meaning they would win the conference. Do they get it done this year?
Yeah, ESPN certainly thinks so, and I find this interesting. I was looking through their top 25, way too early top 25, and of course you see your Ohio States and Oregons, Georgia and Notre Dame all at the top. But before we escape the top 10, a familiar Big 12 face. At number 9, the BYU Cougars, who went 11-2 last year, returning guys like Jake Retzlaff, LJ Martin, Chase Roberts, who will all be massive, massive pieces in not just that athletic department, but also in the Big 12. Harrison Taggart, the possible return of Isaiah Glasker, or Jack Kelly, Tanner Wall. Those are huge, both offensively and defensively. Jay Hill, the defensive coordinator, still being there. I think the OC, A-Rod, still has a little bit that I want to see. The offensive line still has a couple of holes to plug, and I'm not exactly confident on that side of the ball in the BYU Cougars, but their special teams and their defense were elite in 2024. They bring enough guys back in 2025 that they're probably the favorite in the Big 12. Now, ESPN doesn't have Iowa State that far shy of where the Cougars are. They're at number 11. The Cyclones having Rocco Beck, Carson Hansen, Abu Sama, a double-headed running back tandem that is the best in possibly the country. We thought Sama would be the better of the two. We didn't even really know Carson Hansen that much until this season. He had a breakout year, and their defense, again, has like a Caleb Bacon returning, and that will make waves in the Big 12. Iowa State and BYU being maybe the favorite pick for the Big 12 championship. Arizona State, also in ESPN's way too early top 15, ranking at number 14. Kansas State falls in at number 16. TJ, the sky is falling. I don't know what's happening. ESPN, for some reason, is showing a whole lot of love to the Big 12, and they're putting Ole Miss at 25. They're dropping a couple of these SEC teams down. Now, if you look at Bill Connolly's way too early college football playoff projections, he has the BYU Cougars winning the Big 12 conference, going to the playoff, having a bye in the first round. However, the latest ESPN prediction for the college football playoff next year has just one Big 12 team in it. It's a school from the same state as BYU, but it's the Utah Utes. After a 5-7 season, they think they'll bounce back and go to the playoff as the champions of the conference, have the 4 seed, have a bye next year, will obviously beat BYU to get there, and stunning where ESPN steps on its own toes, contradicts itself. First in their top 25, they have BYU in the top 10. Next, they pick Utah to go to the college football playoff. So as exciting as this might be for BYU fans, take everything those 4 letters do with a big old grain of salt.
An ESPN contradiction. I never thought I'd live to see the day. When we look at BYU specifically, and then we'll talk more about ESPN in a moment, how much does the culture there matter to what they're doing? Because there were games that they honestly, in my opinion, as an outsider, I'm not trying to rile up the BYU fans, there were games they should have lost last year that they didn't, and they won. How much does that matter? You talked about some of the questions that we have about them. As many questions as I have, the biggest one that I don't worry about, maybe them along with Arizona State, is the culture that is built at BYU. And I almost think that is, we'll liken it to a Dan Campbell's Lions. We'll liken it to a culture that is very prevalent in Kansas City right now. How much does that factor into the way that they're able to win games they're not supposed to?
Yeah, BYU has a knack for winning. At least that's what they showed in 2024. They hope to bring that into 2025 as well. I want to cover your bases a bit there too, TJ. You say that BYU could have or should have lost a couple of those games, and you're right. If you look at the stat graphics that are, how bad did we get beat? Most of the time, it was the skin of their teeth that BYU was beating some of these teams on paper, whereas the score, like that Kansas State game, would be so blown out of proportion. BYU just found a way to win. Oklahoma State, a last-second game-winning drive. Utah, a last-second game-winning drive, converting a late 4th down with a penalty that was the right call, and you get the penalty, and the BYU goes and they win it. The Cougars just won football games, and they were one key win away against Kansas from going to the Big 12 championship and possibly representing this conference in the college football playoff a year prior to where ESPN predicts them to do so. But speaking on culture, This is what BYU wanted to instill with Kalani Sitake coming back, not being on the hot seat after a 5-7 start his first year in the Big 12. There was no chatter, no murmur of reworking his contract, making things different. Oklahoma State just took money from Mike Gundy directly and gave it to players now. That's a very interesting dynamic you created between head coach and athlete. For Kalani Sitake, it was nothing but full confidence from the administration at BYU. They want him as the head coach, and he brought that to his players. Now, there are upsides and downsides to to that level of culture. Satake runs his show with a lot of love and care. And there's the I'll rip your face off style of college football coach. And there's Kalani Satake. And when he talks a lot about Utah, he talks about them being BYU's friend off the field, to love them, to show them grace. And I think all those align with the LDS faith that's so prominent at BYU. And while I agree those are all very admirable, the question then becomes, we lost a bit of fight for the Cougars against Kansas. You lost a bit of fight in that game against Arizona State in the first half. Where is that killer mentality? So the question will be asked for the next couple of years as BYU is now on the national scale in college football. Will they have the killer mentality in this sport, or will they embrace the love everybody mantra? And if they do one or the other, will it be effective? That's really the only major question I have culture-wise, and I don't think it's a bad one.
All right, so I'm not here for the love between the Holy War, right? Like, I understand it's called the Holy War, but I'm not here for the love. Back to ESPN for a moment. In one projection, having BYU in their college football playoff, and the other having Utah in their college football playoff. We talked about this in a previous video. The Holy War is 365 days. It is not one day, right? On a leap year, it's 366. We don't take a day off for the hate in the Holy War. BYU fans have to be somewhat excited about being in one projection. And then I don't even know if it would be disappointed, maybe more so like laughing with you about Utah being on the other side. Like, again, we talked about this, but just why is Utah on the other side of this? Like, BYU kind of makes a little sense. Utah to me doesn't make much at all.
I posed this a bit on my show, TJ. This is probably a win for BYU fans, the fact that Utah is preseason champions of the Big 12, and that win is being able to 2 years in a row point at the empty spot in the trophy case and saying, well, there it is. There's your preseason Big 12 championship. You won it outright, fair and square. It's all yours. Then you get to the end of the season, it doesn't pan out that way. I do think Utah could be a formidable opponent in the Big 12. I think Utah could make waves in the Big 12. I would be a bit far stretched to predict them in the college football playoff as Big 12 champions, obviously, but I don't mind the idea of them going 9-3 next season and being a thorn in everyone's side in the Big 12. But if you're a BYU fan, I think you relish in this. You say, how great. We get to have Utah fans' hopes up once again. They're going to believe once again, only for the likelihood of them crashing out. Now, maybe it doesn't happen, but I think BYU fans, from their perspective, they want Utah to fall flat on their face, while still hoping that they really do have a college football playoff shot. And those big four letters control most of the money and most of the stuff. And I'll put it this way. They control a lot of money and a lot of the pawns in college football. I wouldn't bet against whatever they predict, because they have a direct correlation to what actually happens.
Yeah, they are they're the puppeteer behind the committee. I raised my hands up, but they were all screaming. They're the puppeteer behind the college football playoff committee, no doubt. Drake, where can people follow you? Where can they find more of your work?
Yeah, at LO Big 12 or wherever you find your podcasts. At LO Big 12 or at Drake Cetol on Twitter, and wherever you find your podcast with Locked On Big 12.